I think just about everyone knows that today is Mother's Day, right? One of the stories that we study quite often, and I think because there's not always that many feel-good stories within the Old Testament, but it's the story of Ruth. And this is starting with she and her husband went forth to the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return into the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. Jehovah deal kindly with you as he has dealt with the dead and with me. Jehovah grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted their voices and wept. And they said unto her, "Nay, but we will return with thee into thy people." And Naomi said, "Turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they will be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, and go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, I should even have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons. Would you therefore tarry till they're grown? And would you rather stay from from having husbands? Nay, daughters, for it grieves me much for your sakes, for the hand of Jehovah has gone forth against me." And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Opha kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave to her and said to her, "Behold, my sister-in-law has gone back to her people and unto her God. Return thou after thy sister-in-law." And Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and whither thou lodgest, I will lodge, and thy people shall be my people, and my God, or thy God, my God. And where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. Jehovah, do so to me, and more so, if aught but death part thee and me." And when she saw that she was steadfast minded to go with her, she left off speaking unto her. So we have Naomi, of course, has lost her husband, has lost her sons. In grief, she's going back to her homeland. And we find that Ruth sticks with her. And as the story goes on, of course, this is ultimately important. Ruth meets Boaz, they get married. Their children are going to be essentially going down into David and ultimately Christ. And so I ask you to think about what would have happened to all of these people if Naomi had not been the type of person to inspire Ruth's loyalty and love. And what would have happened to Ruth and Boaz if they hadn't been trained to, in fact, respect Naomi and to respect mothers and their elders in general. And this is part of the characteristic that we find throughout history. And of course, we've had various failings of it as well. In one way, motherhood is just a natural process. But of course, everyone who is a mother or has been a mother certainly understands the serious responsibility that is associated with it. And in most societies, it is honored. It's not only key to the physical prosperity of children, but through their encouragement. And mothers so often serve as the champions. Yet, surprising perhaps, that there are very few scriptures describing the responsibilities of mothers. You can go to just about as many places to study the responsibilities of elders in the church as you can with mothers. And I think part of the reason for that is it is a natural instinct that God has built into people. We find in Proverbs, passage we look at all the time, 31, A worthy woman, who can find, for her price is above rubies? The heart of her husband trusted her, and shall have no lack of gain, and she doeth him good and not evil all the days of her life. And skipping on down just a little bit, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her, saying, many daughters have done worthwhile, but thou excellest them all. Grace is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth Jehovah, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works be praised at the gate. And if you look at the New Testament, we find again, not many verses and certainly not a lot of verbiage that is there. But Paul wrote to Titus in Titus chapter 2. But speak thou to the things which befit sound doctrine, that aged men be temperate, grave, sober-minded, sound in faith and love and patience. Aged women likewise be reverent in demeanor, not slanderous, nor enslaved to much wine, teachers of that which is good, that they may train the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, be sober-minded, chaste, workers at home, kind, being in subjection to their husbands, that the word of the God might not be blasphemed. Going back to Genesis chapter 3, we find that Eve becomes essentially the standard, the example of what mothers should be. And Paul, I think, reflects that when he wrote to Timothy, I desire that younger women, younger widows, marry, bear children, rule the household, give no occasion to the adversary for reviling. And because I have some other material in here, I'm not going to cover the scriptures that these refer to, but I think they're things that we all recognize. We remember the example of Moses' mother, right? The children of Israel were living as slaves to the Egyptians. The Egyptian king, fearing the prosperity and the rapid birth among the Israelites, had commanded that the male children be killed. And so Moses' mother looks for ways around that because she doesn't want to kill her son, right? And in fact, puts him in a basket in the Nile River to where Pharaoh's daughter finds him. We find Hannah. We remember her. This is during the time of the judges. Hannah is one of two wives. She is barren, does not have children, and beseeches God. And in fact, God grants her a son. Now, she's made a promise that her son, if she has one, is going to be dedicated to God. Of course, that individual is Samuel. And from the New Testament, we read of two women, Lois and Eunice, a grandmother and mother, that we don't know much else about other than the fact that they brought up Timothy to fear God and to understand the scriptures, which must have been particularly challenging because of Timothy's father was a Greek and apparently not that interested, but yet they persevered in doing that. So we find that all of these examples of motherhood, of women who have certainly strive to educate their children, to train their children, to raise their children. The key, though, is emphasizes here is that obviously motherhood's not for all women. First of all, not all women marry, nor is it necessarily good that they do. Paul, in fact, advocates in 1 Corinthians that it may be better because of the current distress that young men and women do not get married. So we shouldn't try to put a fence around people, particularly women, and say, you have to be mothers. No, that doesn't always happen. And even those women who marry, again, like Hannah, they may not have children anyway. So this is not something that, okay, it's a feature of the show how good you are. It is one of those challenges that some have, some do not have. And certainly there are ways to excel. Now, real quickly, when we think about the responsibilities of wives and mothers, we need to be thinking about the reciprocal as well. What are the responsibilities that we have toward them? First of all, children. Not very many passages, but the ones that are there are pretty clear, right? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. So children have a responsibility. And in fact, it's not just young children who have the responsibility either, right? Paul is writing later on to Timothy, who's over in Ephesus, honor widows who are widows indeed. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them learn first to show piety toward their own family and to quiet their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. This isn't unique to Christianity either. This is a requirement that all of the Jews in the congregation would have understood as being there from the beginning. Of course, we see the requirement for husbands. And Paul emphasizes this in Ephesians in chapter 5. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ has loved the church and gave himself up for it, that he might sanctify it, having it cleansed it by washing of the water with the word, that he might present the church to himself a glorious church, not having a spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish, even for husbands to love their own wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his own wife loveth himself. For no man hateth his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, even as Christ also the church, because we are members of his body. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I'm speaking in regard to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, do ye severally love each one his own wife, even as himself, and let his wife see that she fear her husband. Peter chiming in as well, ye husbands, in like manner dwell with your wives according to knowledge, giving honor unto the woman as the weaker vessel, and also being joint heirs of grace of life, to the end that your prayers may not be hindered. So children have a responsibility to their mothers. Husbands have a responsibility to their wives, and certainly those wives that are mothers. But the church has a responsibility as well. And of course, this responsibility, the primary one, is when the woman is left all alone, when the husband is no longer living. Now that she that is a widow indeed, desolate, hath her hope set on God, and continueth in supplication and prayers night and day. But she that giveth himself to pleasure is dead while she liveth. These things also command that they may be without reproach. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for his own household, he is denied the faith and worse than an unbeliever. Let none be enrolled as the widows under 80 years old, having been the husband of one wife, and well reported for good works. If she have brought up children, if she has used hospitality to strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. These are women because of what they have been doing and because of the state in which they have been left in. Yes, the rest of the congregation needs to honor them and help support them. As we focus on motherhood, of course, that's what today is all about. Need to remember again, and I'll emphasize, that women are not limited to the roles of mothers. And in fact, you find in the scriptures women who have been in other roles. Deborah, for example, she was a prophetess. She was the wife of Lapidoth, and she was a judge of Israel. And she was the one that, in fact, instigated the freedom of Israel at that time from their oppressors. We see Lydia, a woman who lived in Thyatira. Here, she was a businesswoman. And the seller of these dyes, particularly purple, was a very important, very prosperous activity. And so she may have been quite wealthy because of her business activities. We find that the church met in her home. So that's probably another good indication. Priscilla, of course, we know her as the wife of Aquila, right? And in fact, when Paul met them in Corinth, they had come from Italy, and he came to them, and because he was in the same trade, he stayed with them. And they were working by trade, they were tent makers. So in this particular case, Aquila and Priscilla, they had a business that they both were working in. And over the last 200 years, to a certain extent, the roles of women have changed. The industrialization resulted in employment of women and also children in factories. And so women who were working in businesses, maybe at home, now we're going off to a factory. And the roles for women grew. And I don't think there was anything particularly wrong with that. At the same time, though, these changes have encouraged subsequent changes, which have not been very desirable. And you may remember many years ago, I presented this lesson, but I'm added some material here because times have changed. And unfortunately, we need to recognize it and address it. The modern world has declared war on motherhood. These are just a few quotes that I found. It didn't take me very long to find them either. Sarah Lamaquad, it should be illegal to be a stay-at-home mom. Rather than wail and be about the supposed liberation of women's rights to choose to shun paid employment, we should make a legal requirement that all parents of children of school age or older be gainfully employed. Of course, Robin Morgan makes it more clear we can't destroy the inequities between men and women until we destroy marriage. Being a housewife is an illegitimate profession, argues Vivian Gornick. And so long as every female, simply by virtue of her anatomy, is obliged, even forced to be the sole or primary caretaker of children, she's prevented from being a free human being. This is the attitudes that, unfortunately, feminism has wrought. And the desire to make women equal in every way to men, and further going on to make women superior to men. The obstacles to that, the idea of marriage, the idea of motherhood, are just in the way of where they want to go. And like a lot of things, a lot of movements that starts with things that, yeah, they sort of make sense. Recognition of women's efforts and abilities outside the home, okay. But by arguing against the differences and the complementary nature of women and men, it becomes inherently anti-male. And I would suggest that in becoming anti-male, it has become anti-female as well. And it has ushered beliefs into our system that are destroying not just the United States, but the whole Western world. And so again, the hostility toward marriage, the hostility toward children, and the gender confusion that we see. And that if you want to make of no account sexual differences, Okay. What's the easiest way to do that but to multiply them into all sorts of things and embracing the postmodern power structure struggles that we find today? Now, to a certain extent, it seems like maybe on the wane. I wouldn't take that for sure because there are certainly many who view life this way. So, how do you fix the problem? To the extent that any individual or any small group can fix the problem. First of all, we need to remember that God created both men and women in his image. And as Christians, we're both children of God. All, again, men, women, all different, everyone is equally valuable in God's sight. Now, when we get into our class in just a little bit, in 1 Corinthians 12, it's going to emphasize this perhaps a little bit more, but recognize the strengths and weaknesses that different people have. And that comes also from your particular background, particular language, whether you're male or female. You're going to have those strengths and weaknesses and work to reinforce each other and to not tear it down. Now, those fundamentally won't attack all of the strange ideas that might come out of academia. But what we can do is work to provide an example of God's plan working. Show that how God has created us, if we follow that plan, yeah, it really does work. And that can probably do as much, if not more, than anything else that you and I can do or say or write. But I want to conclude by maybe going back to the original idea that, yes, this is a special day to honor mothers, and I think it's a very good idea. But it's not just the responsibilities of mothers that we need to be thinking about. We need to honor them. We need to certainly keep them in mind not only today, but every day. And also certainly provide the support that we can to make functioning families and functioning churches and functioning communities. Thank you.